Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Her Hollywood Unscripted, where I share stories of women who have forged through Hollywood and broken the metaphorical glass ceiling. Their stories are here to inspire other young women about the do's and don'ts of femininity's intersection with Hollywood. Today, I'm thrilled to have another incredible guest joining us. Corinne is a powerhouse TV producer and writer who has had a hand in shaping some pretty iconic shows in the past 2 decades. You've probably seen her work on Elementary, The Good Wife, Jane the Virgin, American Gothic, No Tomorrow, and Boston Legal, just to name a few. Corinne's talent for storytelling and her incredible behind-the-scenes contributions make her a perfect guest for this podcast, and I'm so excited to dive into her journey, the challenges of the industry, and her creative process. So, Corinne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. What a sweet intro. Thank you.
I'd love to know at what point you discovered you wanted to work in entertainment.
It wasn't really like a viable career path. I grew up in Kansas, so it wasn't like the front of top of mind for me as far as like what I could do. But I was really always into reading and stories and characters. And then when I was old enough to get to watch a little TV, I was like, well, this is even cooler than reading. But I originally thought that I wanted to be an actor because of the way that they just had such funny lines, or they could make you cry. And then it occurred to me at some point, like, oh, they're not, they didn't write that, they're performing it, but I actually want the job of writing it, of writing writing the funny lines and creating the story more than I want to be, the performer. And so somewhere in college, I think there was like one class available. I went to a small school in Missouri called Truman State. And there was one film production class or TV production class, I guess, and that was enough. It was like a really not, it was like a very bare bones type of production setup, but it was enough to kind of get me hooked. And then I started looking at master's programs in TV production and wound up at Boston University for my master's degree. And then after that, moved out to LA and started interning. And that's when I worked for David E. Kelley. And that's when I met your mom. And that was the start of my whole career.
I do want to know about your first job and what that was like and how you kind of climbed from there or any pivotal moments that kind of shaped your career.
Yeah, it was just a really amazing time when I worked for at DEK. I was David Kelley was somebody I had long admired and had watched his shows since I was a kid. And we talked about him in our graduate studies, and to be in his presence and actually getting to learn directly from him was just as good as it could get for an aspiring writer. And so because I was kind of in his inner circle. I started as an intern, and then I got to interview to be his to be his PA, like his personal kind of like second assistant. And that was my first paid job in Hollywood. And my main job was to get him coffee from Starbucks. I mean, that's where it started. And I was so honored. I was like, I cannot believe I get to do that. I get to be the coffee person for David. And then, he was really wonderful. He just gave me more and more to do. And the people in his assistant and his script coordinators would let me write episode summaries and let me do research and write script coverage. And I got entrusted with more and more as I was learning. And because I was in his office, there were only four of us. I got to have access to every script, every iteration of every script. So it was just like a second kind of master's in TV writing. I mean, in terms of actual applicable skills, it was more useful than the actual master's degree. The way that sort of like this giant turning point of my career and my life happened was all about being at David E. Kelley. But he had told me I could write. I told him I wanted to be a writer. Like, it took me a year or two to be like, this is really my ambition. And it was terrifying to tell one of the greatest writers of all time, I want to do what you do. But he was very encouraging. He said, you can pitch me ideas for Boston Legal. You could pitch me story ideas. If you read up on interesting legal cases or news articles that you think could make a good story, like, pitch them to me, just write them up and send them to me. And, I'll consider them. So I did that. Like every week for weeks and weeks. And I didn't hear from him. And I thought, oh, that was kind of him to just like encourage me to generate the ideas, but they're not really ever going to be, it's not really that was enough of a help without him actually following up on them. And I just took two of them that I thought were the most promising, and wrote them into a spec script of Boston Legal. just like a sample script on spec. And so, but then one day he came in and said, let me see your idea. I read all your ideas. He was like, was holding like 8 weeks worth of ideas and all
Wow.
these pages that I had sent up. And I was like, oh my God. And I went in his office so nervous. And he said, there's two of these, and there were probably 50 ideas. There's two of these that are really good. And they were thankfully the same two that I also thought were the best and had also already written into a spec script. And so we talked through like a lot of them and like why they worked or didn't work. And sometimes he's like, I did this on LA Law 15 years ago. So it was just like really interesting insight and like into what he thought was viable or not in terms of a story idea. And but he liked these two, and so it was just serendipity. It was sort of that classic like luck is where preparation meets opportunity. He called me the next day, and this is the turning point that I'll like remember till the day I die. He called me and he said, I read your script, and he said, it's it's great. It's an amazing first effort. Those were the words because he was like, it's great. It's an amazing first effort, and I thought, oh my God, I cannot believe that I'm getting this kind of like, I just wanted him to read it and give me any kind of feedback, or even if it was like, this is not your thing, like try something else. That would have also been useful feedback. But for him to say like, yeah, you should stick with this. Like you can do it. It was like life changing. And he said, I want to send it to the writers, the writing staff, and see if, get their take. And anyway, long story short, they read it. The sort of head writer over there, they ended up buying it as a spec script. They bought it, and it became an episode of the show, which is just hard to explain how crazy that is and how unlikely that is. So it's a total Cinderella story. I tell people this story, and it's always like, don't expect that to happen. That was very unusual. I was super, super fortunate.
That's so cool. I feel like you don't hear often that people really enjoyed their first job that much. I feel like they always tell you they're like, your first job's not going to be the one. So that's so awesome that you had an experience like that. And I also think that a lot of people could learn from you and how just kind of perseverant you were in getting him to read your work. I think that's probably good advice for young writers out there.
I was just gonna say, I think it also helped that like I at that point I'd worked for him for like 2 years at the time that I asked him to read something. I think that's really important too, that like I sort of proved to him that like my commitment, I or at least didn't come in on the first day like I'm ready for a promotion. Here's my,
Right,
I
right.
really like I paid my dues, and I not and that said, I didn't pay them as long as a lot of people do. So I was still incredibly lucky, but I did like try to learn the ropes instead of coming in with like an assumption of that I was ready, because I absolutely was not ready. And even then I wasn't ready, but I was ready to learn and get to the next step.
That's great advice. And I do want to talk about intersectionality a little bit because you do hear all the time that entertainment is such a boys' club. And so, as a female writer in Hollywood, do you think you've faced any unique challenges that a man maybe wouldn't have? And how have you navigated those?
I remember my agent calling me and saying, oh, I got you this meeting on the show. I won't say what show. And he said, um, they haven't found their woman yet. And
Wow.
that's how it worked. Like it was like it's an understanding that there's an obligation to hire a woman, and they are trying to fulfill that quota. And because they haven't done it yet, you have a chance to be that person, that token. I mean, it's pure tokenism, right? So it's like that's how it worked. And I was grateful. I was like, oh my God, I have a chance. Like you were looking for that one spot out of 12.
And I've talked to another writer so far, and she was telling me that they always have the female hire and then the diversity hire. And that's just so crazy because you'd think if you're writing TV, you want so many different perspectives to be represented that it makes way
Yeah,
more sense to have a diverse room of hires. But that's really crazy.
absolutely. And it has changed so drastically in my 20 years since I've been my first job till now, that it sounds absurd now. And of course you want every perspective you can possibly get. And that's pretty standard in my experience at this point. Like I have not seen a male dominated writer's room in many years.
That's awesome that we're making progress. And how do you balance your personal identity with the stories you tell? Do you ever feel like you need to compartmentalize the two, or do they naturally intertwine into your
That's
writing?
such a good question. Yeah, I think a lot of us are pulling from personal lives all the time. I think those are the stories that really feel alive and relatable when you're mining something personal. I'll write about anything, but I'd rather it was my script, like the things that I'm developing, you know, the last like 7, 8 years, I've just developed my own material rather than work on other people's shows. And I'd have felt like that when I'm assigned to someone else's show. Uh, I'm not going to use my very best personal, you know, like I want to save that for my own pilot or my own that's purely in my voice rather than using like a really precious personal story for a different show, if that makes sense. But I don't really feel like I won't use it. I often disguise a story, you know, change some details, but it's very useful. Yeah, I sometimes say that I feel like it's like it's a little bit of artful plagiarization of real life, you know.
And we talked about being a female in the hiring process, but have there been moments when you felt underestimated or your work was dismissed because you were a female? And how did you handle those situations?
Coming up as a young woman, youngish, I was always for, you know, the first 10, 15 years of my career, I was the youngest person in the room and I was often the only woman in the room. Um and it's not like, oh, it was not overt. I didn't feel like I was overtly like discriminated against or dismissed, but when the people in power and the people who outrank you are all men, then there's just a power dynamic that emerges sort of organically that's hard to to not feel, you know, in the day to day. But no, I think I remember the first time I was show running, I talked to a female showrunner. But had called her about something else, and I said, "Do you have any advice?" Because this is my first day show running, and she was like, "Yeah, when you go on set, if it's the exact same show and you're the exact same person, but you're a man, people who will see you as a showrunner as a man and assume competence." And she's like, "And because you're a woman, just because you're a woman, you will have to prove competence, and it's not fair, and it hopefully isn't forever, but that is just the reality." And she was exactly right. There was no assumption of competence in that kind of leadership role as a showrunner. I had to prove it.
Wow. And can we talk about some of the biggest hurdles you've overcome in your writing career and what they taught you?
Sure, I've gotten, you know, the sort of catastrophic notes from an executive, like you turn in a script, and one time I turned in a script that I felt I didn't feel great about, but it was exactly the outline. So there's, you know, basic steps of developing a pilot script, and you do a story area and they approve that, and you do an outline and they approve that, and then you write the script. So because it was an approved outline and everyone's happy with the outline, I didn't change it drastically. I turned in the script, and then I think the note was something like it's not compelling, or like it's not dramatically compelling, which is something like that that was like, oh no, like this is like a what I call a catastrophic note where you're not, it's not, hey, can we re-break the B story, or this character is not really tracking for us, or like we want to end in a different spot, or we need to restructure the first two acts, or it was like this doesn't work. And so I had like about 3 days to re-break it, like reconceive the whole plot. And I did, and I ended up getting to make that show. But so that was kind of a, but then it was not very well received critically, which was another big hurdle. So, you know, it's up and down. It's a ride.
Totally. I think that's just probably part of the business, especially when you're producing so much work. I'm sure you get feedback all the time that you're like, oh, well, gotta pivot.
Yeah. And I think that resilience and humility are the most useful skills to develop in terms of survival.
Absolutely. And what's your current take on the landscape of diversity in Hollywood? Do you think it's improving? Do you still think we have a long way to go?
Yes and yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, given if I think about 20 years ago when I started to now, drastically improved. But of course, there's so far to go. Um, but I think the people that I have been lucky enough to work with and are very committed to that, and so am I. So I think everything's headed in the right direction. But of course, it's a long-term ambition. So.
A lot of my research covered the Me Too movement. So I want to know from you, do you think the Me Too movement has made lasting changes for women in Hollywood, especially in writers' rooms?
Wow, that's a good question. Yes, it has. I mean, I absolutely can think of specific circumstances that I had to deal with before pre Me Too that would never fly now. like, and there is a comfort in knowing I would not have to endure that. I would not have to help a friend who's enduring that. Because there's just not the tolerance for it isn't there anymore, which is a huge relief. But again, it's a place where there will always be progress to make, but I think there will also always be people committed to that progress.
How important were your relationships with other women to your success?
Oh, hugely important, hugely important. I mean, obviously David was a mentor. But after that, yeah, I had several female mentors and who I really looked up to, but I think even more than that, like I worked on The Good Wife, and um, there were three women on that staff, and we were all lower level, and the upper level writers were all men. And so we kind of had this, um, we just really bonded because we were in a similar situation, and everybody was wonderful, but it's like what I talked about before. There was absolutely kind of a, just a built-in power dynamic that just by virtue of where we were in our careers and where the industry was as a whole, like we had not sort of ascended to the upper level. So we were kind of in our lower ranks together, and we would just have lunch together in my office, which we called the Estro Den, because it was just like oh, lady power. And we really just drew so much comfort from each other, and we're very close. And I have a lot of those bonds from different shows, and not just women, but a ton of women. Yeah.
Yeah, and a common theme that I've heard as I've been having these conversations is that other women talk about how until you've kind of established yourself in the industry, it's harder to help out other women. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of helping. Obviously, like now at this point now, it's much easier for me to, um, I'm in a position where I can hire people, or I can recommend people to be hired. But when I was first starting, it was like, yeah, you're just trying to get the job yourself, so you can't really bring anybody with you at that point. But I think you could still help each other. I mean, I was in a writers group super early on, even before the Boston Legal Script. And that was just that was a way we were helping each other without directly being able to influence each other's employment, or be in a position, any position of like power to get someone a job. But we were still working with each other. We were still helping each other, just in terms of reading material and giving notes and encouraging each other. And that was a really important stage as well. So, but yeah, it is. I mean, if you're just hustling to get that first gig, you're not really in any kind of power position to help anybody else, other than, again, like to read each other's material and encourage each other, and etc. But it is tough getting in. That's probably always going to be true.
And that kind of leads right into my next question. I was going to ask you about women-run groups within the industry that you joined or you saw your colleagues join. Are these advertised often? Are they super accessible to women?
I know the Writers Guild has a women female writers group that meets. I don't, but no, in terms of any other organized like female focused groups, I haven't had. I mean, they've been sort of organically formed. You just, like, most of my close friends are female TV writers, and or actors I've met, or people who are producers or related to the industry in some way. We sort of find each other that way, and just kind of have, but not like an organized group. I don't think I've had a lot of experience with that.
Right, which I think, if women are forming these groups on their own, that's just a testament to women's solidarity and how powerful it can be and how effective it can be. I do want to ask you, just because you've had so much experience, what are the key skills that a writer should develop if they want to succeed in the competitive environment of Hollywood?
One thing I learned early on from David Kelly was to constantly rewrite yourself, to not be precious. And he's so brilliant, and his first draft of anything is better than everyone else's final draft. But he would still rewrite and throw things out, and sometimes they would surface somewhere else, or maybe not. But he just wasn't precious about his own material. And they say kill your darlings. It's like he could just to be able to have the humility to just go, if this isn't working, even though there's one scene is so perfect and I love it, but the larger piece is not working, I throw it all out, I'm going to start over. to get comfortable with that, I think is a really helpful skill. And I still struggle with that. Sometimes I'm like, but this is, I don't want to let go of this one piece, even though it's undercutting. I just went through this recently where there was this sort of this plot piece that was going to be much later in the season of a series I'm developing, but I was so committed to it that it was shaping what was happening in the pilot episode in a negative way. And just letting go of that. I mean, like, I'll figure that out later when I get to episode 5, reshape the pilot in such a huge way. And I was so grateful that I got that note. Like, can we lose that so that we're not costing something in the pilot, just to pay off later. So I still struggle with it, but yeah, being able to like not be precious about your own ideas and writing and how it should all play out. And I think I'm like, as I mentioned earlier, resilience, and you've got to have a bit of a thick skin. It can be really brutal. But I think it's worth it. And then and that gets easier too, just sort of over time. And humility, I feel, always makes people root for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, those would be the things I would emphasize.
I think that's awesome advice. And I also want to ask, just for people who aren't familiar, can you break down what you do in a day? If you're writing for a TV show, what does that process look like? What does your day-to-day look like?
And it on a TV show that's in production.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're probably I would probably be in the writer's room. If it was something I was show running, like I'd probably be in the writer's room for as much time as I could. So we'd be in in a room with like maybe 8 to 10 writers. Well, I don't know. The budgets are smaller now. It's probably smaller staffs, but and you're just like big whiteboards and you're sort of plotting out whatever episode you happen to be on, tracking what happened before and where you're headed. We usually have the entire season kind of planned out in the first couple of weeks and the broad strokes of the season. And so, yeah, you're just trying to make progress in the writer's room in terms of what we call breaking the story, or what that specific episode. But then if I were on staff just as a writer, that would be my main thing. Is I'm just in the writer's room every day, and unless I'm assigned a script, and then I go off and write the script, or I first write the outline and then write the script. And then might be in production and do meetings like you do production meetings and tone meetings where you talk through the tone of each scene of the script. Um, might be in post-production. It just depends on what my role would be on the show, how many of these different departments I would be involved with. But the bulk of it as a TV writer, until you're like in a higher up position, is being in a writer's room and just essentially just talking through where a story could go, and figuring out the structure. And for me, that usually starts with you want to know what is our overall theme, or what's our in the broadest strokes, what story are we telling for this? And then you could start, if you have you start breaking it into acts and then working from there. It's a little bit of engineering, ironically. Like it's a little bit of sort of building the scaffolding of story, and then you get to kind of fill in the fun detail.
Yeah, that sounds honestly so fun. I can imagine like collaborating with people too. Just like I can imagine the energy in the room. That's really fun.
It's really, really fun. I miss it a lot because, like I said, I've been it's been amazing to get to develop my own material and just work with my producing partner, and get to only focus on the things that I'm creating. But I really miss being in a writer's room. It's an incredible collaborative energy. And when the chemistry is right, it's just a ton of fun and very productive.
That's awesome. And just for fun, what were some of the most rewarding moments in your career? What were some of your fondest memories? I think that it's important for young women to know that even though it's really hard to break into the industry, there's so many rewarding moments. And so I'd love to hear some of yours.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's 100% worth it. It's the best job. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. It's so fun. I mean, I've said, like, I get to sit, like, if you boil it down, you're just like sitting in a room with all these smart, funny people having spirited conversations about what pretend people do in made up situations. Like, how can you get paid for that? Like that, what a dream. It's so much fun. I think the first time, that phone call from David, and like knowing that we were going to, that he liked my script, and like I could actually make a go of this career, and then getting to go shoot that first episode, it was just amazing to have these incredible actors, James Spader and Candice Bergen and William Shatner, performing actually, saying the words that I had written on a, as a spec at 20, 24, 25 years old. So That was a real thrill. Working on The Good Wife was such a high point too. And, you know, we were Emmy nominated, and that was, and getting to go to the Emmys was really thrilling. My first pilot, first show running, the second time show running, weirdly, I had two shows kind of got picked up, kind of overlapped. And that was a wild time. And, also pretty thrilling, and a lot of fun. I got to go for No Tomorrow. It was nominated for this Monte Carlo TV festival, and
Wow.
I could fly over to Monte Carlo, and that was a really fun trip and a cool experience. And then now just getting to work, like the people I've gotten to work with, when I'm developing my own material, it's very exciting and creatively invigorating. And so yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next high point. I don't know. You never know when it's coming.
I
It's
know
one of my
it could
favorite
be
things.
coming around the corner.
Yeah, that's one of the best things I think about this industry is like your life could change on any day. You have no idea when you're going to get that call saying like, yeah, you got the job, you're staffed on the show, or yeah, your pilot's getting picked up, we're going to shoot it. Or sorry, your series is getting canceled. Like just any moment your life can change, which is thrilling. And also, you know, if you're looking for stability and predictability, it's not the career, but I love how dynamic it is.
Yeah. And I feel like you've just in the last like 5 minutes, you've probably gotten so many people fired up about the industry because you just make it sound so exciting. So, if
Yeah,
you
it
could
is.
give one piece of advice to other young women trying to break into entertainment, what would it be? Any final words?
I think find your own voice. I think there's so much um imitation, and sometimes you have to do that. I mean, that's part of a job working on someone else's show, is learning to mimic their style and their voice. But I think to really, that was when I started, you wrote a spec of someone else's show, and that's how you kind of proved your chops. And now it's so much more focused on what is your original exciting fresh voice, or what's your story. And I think being able to hone that and cultivate that, like what really animates you, what are you super passionate about. And I feel like it's it's a classic sort of write what you know, but more than write what you know, like write what enlivens you, like write what thrills you, write what breaks your heart. And in that, when it's coming from a really true pure place, I think a real voice emerges, and that's what gets people's attention.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's probably good advice for writers, like, even people writing books, because I think you admire your idols, and so you try to like pick up their writing styles.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about it in journalism too. But I think it's just so good to have your own voice, and that's what makes you stand out. So thank you so much for your insights and your perspectives. You're so positive, and it's just been so awesome to talk with you. So thank you, Corinne, so much for
Oh,
being
thank you so
here.
much, Emma. It's so nice to talk to you.
All right, we'll see you guys on next week's episode. Bye.